Bueno, bienvenidos a Mentes en Equilibrio. Welcome to Mentes en Equilibrio. Before starting, I want to say that here in Mentes en Equilibrio, I usually create content in Spanish. But well, the good thing is that YouTube now creates automatically subtitles in many, many languages. And my amazing guest today, it's an extra motivation so can finally challenge myself and start creating content in English. This is the first video that I do in English. And Mike said he didn't spoke very well Spanish, but before this we had a little conversation and he is very fluent, but I'm gonna do this. So please be kind with me. Um, Today, as part of the week program for the Immigrants Day, I have the honor to have Mike Niconchuk, a neuroscience researcher slash humanitarian who focuses on refugees and the intersection with trauma. He's here today to share what he has learned about healing and coping and all the things that he has learned through working with forced immigrants and displaced communities. And I found Mike this year at the Master's event in Trauma at Oxford. And listening to his conference, he inspired me. And I thought, I need to talk to this man. So that's why I invited him today, because the way he connects science with his personal history, with the experience he has working in refugee camps is amazing. And it's an honor to have you here. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Mike.
Thank you for having me and for dealing with my own language traumas, as we've talked about.
Yes,
Um,
but well, here
um,
we are to learn, and this is part of migration, the diversity, being flexible, right? Not assuming, because I assume you spoke Spanish very fluently because your mom is from Guatemala. You say you didn't, but you do. But well, next time we'll be in Spanish.
y será un gusto, como te dije, esas son, esos son los legados de migración, como dijiste, que tener mamá de Guatemala, ¿es ser de Guatemala o no? O sea, esas preguntas siempre yo me pregunto a mí mismo, ¿qué quiere decir ser de un lugar, ser de un linaje cultural,
Mm,
de un, de una cultura, de un idioma? Sentir parte de o ser de, esas son cosas que son muy íntimas y interpretaciones íntimas.
mhm.
No sé, aquí estamos, pues, let's do it in English.
Good. And from that, I think that moving between two cultures is like um, starting to find us in that in between, right? And not only finding us, but constructing us with the things that we value and expanding the way to experience life. That's how I see it, right? I don't have my parents are
Mm.
not immigrants. I was the first one that migrated in my family. But being from Mexico and living abroad 11 years in Spain, 1 year in Argentina,
Mm.
has helped me to see differently, moving between cultures. And despite it has a lot of challenges, and my migration was voluntarily, um, it also is an opportunity. This is my case. So, um, first of all, I will love you to share who is Mike Niconchuk and a little bit about that story, where everything started, a little bit about your personal and family
Yeah.
experiences, and how these influence and shape your professional path, Mike.
You mentioned moving between two cultures, and part of my sensitivity around Guatemala and around language and culture is because I, by choice, added a third cultural component into the mix. I mean, growing up, my my family and my mom carried her own thoughts, feelings, history, pain, joy of her identity as Guatemalan. I mean, as many people who lived through various conflicts of Central America in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the memories aren't always clean. the memories of what happened, of what it meant to leave a place, voluntarily or involuntarily. Sometimes these lines are a little bit blurry too. And yes, there's a difference of leaving somewhere because there's bombs falling on your house and making the decision that you would like to raise your family somewhere else. The way that we categorize forced and voluntary is also something that's quite complex, and the way that the law defines it is different than the way that our hearts might define it. And we have to live with the ambiguity. But in any case, growing up in the US and then my first substantial body of work was actually in Jordan. I moved to Jordan when I was 23 years old.
Mm-hmm.
This was for a volunteer position for an internship with a local humanitarian organization. And I had studied Arabic in university, classical Arabic, in addition to my studies in international politics and security. It was a practical decision. I wanted to have an additional language. Como te dije que español no fue mi primer idioma, pero hablamos siempre con mis abuelos en español en la casa cuando nos visitaron y cuando fuimos a Guatemala. Pero I wanted to have something else, open up a new part of the world. And I always had a strong interest in the Middle East. And I learned Arabic as best I could from, let's say, book Arabic. And then I went to volunteer for a few months, what was supposed to be a few months in Jordan. But my presence in Jordan was interestingly timed with the escalation of the crisis in Syria, of the war in Syria, that was in the news, out of the news, in the news, out of the news for such a long time. And only recently did we have the 1 year anniversary of the collapse of the House of al-Assad and the emergence of a new government that is trying to create a very different future for Syria's people. But my time in Jordan was supposed to be 4 months, and then it became 6 months, then 8 months. And now I still find myself spending a significant part of my time there, working there. I lived there off and on for about 10 years, taking some time out to do graduate school in the UK through a Fulbright scholarship. But I introduced a whole other cultural element to myself and my heart and my work.
Mhm. And you said it was something that you felt that interested about. I'm going back to your mom. Like, you shared your story on the conference on about your mom living this war when she was young at Guatemala, right? It was not the purpose of her migration. It was not what made her go out from Guatemala. But do you think the pain that she carried indirectly impacted you, and that's what led you to do what you do?
To attribute causality to things is always a complicated experiment, right? I would say maybe. There's this, as you asked that question, there's this line from a song that came to mind. Um, and I don't know why this came into my head, but it's from the soundtrack of Cien Años de Soledad.
Mhm.
And because Shakira sings the soundtrack, and there was this line where she talks about como se funda la arena del mar. Like what is a river and what is the ocean?
Mm,
Cuando ese agua se funda en la arena del mar, que se vuelve mar o sigue río.
mhm,
And this is I think the big question is when does the pain and the woundedness that I carry stop being mine? When has it been given to an ocean of others? When has it spread to the people that I'm intimately close to, whether it's through my personality, or they've picked up a trait from me, or
mhm,
I've created environments where certain things happen, or even potentially in the case of offspring, the the transfer of certain genetic qualities and epigenetic issues that can occur. How do we know? I mean, looking back, I would say that some of the things that happened to my mom as a result of various experiences of the war in Guatemala, they made her very vigilant, very anxious,
mhm,
very protective.
mhm.
unreasonably concerned about things like her children being kidnapped in suburban Boston.
Mhm.
You know, secuestros que no, eso es lo que pasa en Centroamérica, y eso, asaltos y eso.
Mhm.
Small things that were a part of her every day, that were a part of her psychological landscape, that they remained a part of her landscape as the area and the space and the geography around her changed. And this is what we see with migrants, whether by force or by choice, that you remove someone from a place, but there's parts of the place and the context that have embedded themselves in the soul, in the heart, in the psyche that continue. And sometimes that's unnoticed because environments change, but the conditions are the same. If you go from, Mexico City to Guatemala City, it's a different context, but some of the small ways of walking, of being, of talking, of avoiding, of approaching might be the same. But
Mhm.
when you go to Geneva, some things about, oh, having an extra credit card in my shoe or having my burner phone on the table and keeping my real phone in my bag, those behaviors somehow immediately become kind of maladaptive and inappropriate for the context that you're in. So who knows if that's what caused my interest in this, but absolutely I was always intrigued by why things were the way they were in Guatemala, why my mom was the way that she was. And I didn't even know the full history of her experiences during the war until I accidentally uncovered it through
Mhm.
working in Guatemala for a short time during university.
Mhm. She didn't share anything about this before.
I mean, Guatemalan textbooks don't share certain things about it. There's a very sanitized narrative that has emerged after the war. And of course, it ended 30 years ago now. 1996 was when los acuerdos de paz se firmaron. And then there are still multiple narratives about what that was, about what happened.
Mhm.
You can read books and articles about genocide. You can read books and articles about white anthropologists fabricating genocide. You can read books and articles about witch hunts against certain politicians, but it wasn't actually their fault. I mean, in the society, there's still so many narratives about what happened or didn't happen. There's not an agreed upon story. Of course, there's a majority story that history has gotten better and better at documenting. There was truth commissions and things, and those reports are readily accessible. But all that is to say, within, you know, growing up with a mom who wasn't living there anymore, and we didn't go back very much when I was really small because it was still kind of turbulente, puedes decir.
Mhm.
We didn't know much about what she had gone through, what happened during that time period. Her and her sister have different experiences of some of the same events because they're different developmental stages. So no, we didn't really talk about it much growing up.
Mhm.
We knew that it was sometimes dangerous. There was this narrative of it was dangerous, it's getting better. There's certain areas you can't go to, shouldn't go to, things like that.
Mhm. And maybe you didn't knew many of the parts of the history, right? But you maybe notice many of the effects. As you said, maybe it's something simple as the purse or the credit card. It may make
Yeah,
because we do that all the time. Like the context could change, but the fears come with us. Like I think that what we experience, the internal consequences move with us if we don't work them, if we don't give them a space and validate them, right? Um, and I think it's something that you do,
yeah,
right, in your daily life.
mm,
It's more about not whose side of the story you come from, right? The bads or the good ones is more about the effect,
yeah.
how it has affected you, the war or the conflict, right?
I think so much about cartografía,
Hmm.
right? You'll see in my office here is one, two, three, four maps,
Hmm.
and then you could consider this a map. This is actually a replica of hand-drawn illustrations by Santiago Ramón y Cajal, who was a Spanish neuroscientist. in the late 19th century, I believe. And he, along with Golgi in Italy, were sort of locked in a competition of trying to understand the function of neurons. So Ramon y Cajal was one of the first folks to put neurons under a microscope and look at their structure, look at the branches that they have. And he has so many drawings um, of what he was seeing, these maps, these neural maps under a microscope of how the dendrites do they connect or do they just come up near the axons and the terminuses of the other neurons? So I could consider this a fifth map, a map of neurons. But all that is to say, we are all cartographers.
Mhm.
We all are cartographers that are constantly drawing and studying a map within us that helps us stay safe, that helps us stay alive in whatever circumstance that we're in.
Mhm.
Right? So this is the job of the mind, of the brain and the body. It doesn't care if you're happy. It doesn't care if you're sad. It cares that you're alive.
Mhm.
So it's very agnostic, right? It doesn't necessarily care about affective or social outcomes, other than insofar as having social others around you can increase your chances of staying alive. But the fundamental goal that this map has, this is your map to help you stay alive and safe in whatever circumstances that you're in. And that's how you start to build and navigate the world around you. And so when you move to a new place, you have a map that is no longer in service of the place that you're in. The
Totally.
map is wrong.
Mhm. Mhm.
So am I navigating with the old map? Is my compass working the right way? Oh shit, I have to make a new map now or update my map. And that process takes time and it can feel really destabilizing
Mhm.
because one, this map that I have did help me stay alive. I'm here, I'm safe. Why would I want a new map?
Mhm.
So there's a part, I think, of the journey of many immigrants and of many folks that move from place to place for whatever reason that there's a fear that comes with updating the map of how to navigate things.
Mhm.
Because am I abandoning some hard-earned instinct that helped me stay safe?
Mhm. It makes a lot of sense to me because many of the work that I do with the immigrants and multicultural couples and multicultural families, that is the 90% of the people that I work with, is this like working on constructing from zero sometimes a map, right? And as you said, it's
Mm.
very uncomfortable process. Is um, going in a process of migratory grief. Um, is not only losing their language, their material things, their geography, their culture, is also losing themselves. Always say that it's like a symbolic death, right? What about if it's already complex and it brings a lot of struggles when we do it, as you said, there's a thin line with the voluntarily and non-voluntarily, right? But how it gets more complex when the reconstruction is in involuntary migration, like from what you have seen in your like direct experience in refugee camps, and what is the most significant consequence to these maps and to the process of reconstructing and recreating these maps
Mm.
safety.
Yeah, I want to be clear that I'm speaking about a narrow context of my work, which is really grounded in the experience that I've seen of Syrians,
Mhm.
and in some cases, folks from Iraq and other places. But a lot of my learning comes from the experience that I had in what's called Bilad al-Sham, or Greater Syria or the Levant
Mhm.
of Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, parts of Iraq, this part of the world where I spent most of the past 10 years. And I'm not suggesting that my conclusions or my observations apply to all situations of migration, but one thing that we learned, me and my colleagues learned very much there, was the experiences and accompaniment of folks that had fled a very violent and serious war that also occurred in a regime that was quite brutal. I mean, we're still uncovering the horror stories of what happened in Syria for decades.
Mhm.
Um, and it made us think and made me think a lot about how do we construct safety?
Mhm.
And I'm quite obsessed with the idea of safety. And I was thinking before this interview, aún la historia de la palabra seguridad. La
Mhm.
palabra seguridad para mí es un poco insuficiente,
Mhm.
porque cuando decís me siento seguro, yo ahorita siento seguridad o inseguridad, eso significa mucho más que safety material. O sea, it's not just this physical security, right? And so I was looking it up before this. En español, esa palabra seguridad viene del latín y latín clásico, la palabra securus.
Mhm.
¿Y eso qué significa en latín? En latín antiguo es libre de preocupaciones o sin preocupaciones. Es
Mhm.
una combinación del prefijo de sin y cura, entonces sin preocupación o sin cuidado.
Mhm.
Pero cuando nosotros decimos que es un país seguro, es decir, estable, o, a lack of peligro, a lack of danger.
Mhm.
But when I think of the construction of safety in myself and in people that I've cared about or people that I've worked with, feeling safe goes way beyond simply feeling a lack of danger. And
Mhm.
so this has prompted more and more neuroscience study for me. And there's a theory of safety that I'm quite a fan of. It's called guts. GUTS, guts. It's the generalized unsafety theory of stress.
Mhm.
For a long, long time, we've operated under the assumption that the human stress and threat response is something that comes online when we detect a perceived or a real threat,
Mhm.
right? All of what we know about the activation of the autonomic nervous system, the production of cortisol, of norepinephrine, the physiological changes we see to heart rate, shallowness of breath. We operate under the assumption that these things come online as a response to the presence of a threat, whether
Mhm.
that threat is real or imagined. This theory of guts offers a slightly different take, and they suggest that actually, when you look across like mamíferos sociales, other species of social animals or social mammals in particular, it seems that the threat and stress response is actually on all the time by default
Mhm.
because the world is so damn dangerous.
Mhm.
And what turns that threat and stress response off or down is not a lack of threat, but the presence of clear safety cues,
Mhm.
right? So, cualquier señal de seguridad en el ambiente, aunque sea una persona, un lugar, un techo seguro, dinero,
Mhm.
finanzas seguras, all these different material and non-material factors, even access to spiritual practices, access to cultural practices, to language. We see so many instances of violence and conflict where there is an intentional targeting of esos recursos de seguridad.
Mhm.
Why are churches bombed often? Access roads to cultural sites, preventing certain communities from speaking their language in certain spaces. We even saw this in places like, in Ireland and other communities where there was all sorts of laws and repressions of indigenous language use and things. And the logic started to make much more sense for me as I was understanding what people are going through is a crisis in being able to access safety resources,
Mhm.
those things that make them feel safe.
Mhm.
And as we've continued that study, we've sort of done more and more interviews around this idea of tell me about safety.
Mhm.
Tell me about alternative words, if you couldn't use the word safety, but you were describing that feeling within you of what is it? If it's not safety, give me another word. So in Arabic, we've developed a little bit of a dictionary of alternative words. Words like istiqrar. Istiqrar means settledness
Mhm.
or estabilidad, podemos decir. We also have a word called طمأنينة, which means assurance.
Mhm.
So assurance, usually it has like a spiritual implication.
Mhm.
I'm sure we can think of a good equivalent word in Spanish for that. And then we also have words like ihtimam. Ihtimam means care,
Mhm.
que yo soy importante para alguien, que alguien me va a cuidar.
Mhm.
Because that feeling of abandonment is so central to this deep sense of lack of safety. Because when safety resources disappear, whether and there's five, like, hemos identificado cinco ejes de seguridad, of what we would think constitute this subjective feeling of safety. And it's cosas materiales, money, housing, food, lo básico. Conexión a la tierra o el lugar. Right.
Mhm.
This can happen even for migrants too, because I know many folks that grew up in places that they're not a part of, whether it's, you and wherever you're living now. I've lived in many places and I've developed a connection with land, with community, within neighborhood. So it's about this idea of feeling a sense of mutual care and respect and belonging con
Mhm.
la tierra donde vives, wherever place you're inhabiting.
Mhm.
Relaciones seguras con personas que te significan algo. It's not just about having people around you because you can have lots of people around you and still feel very lonely. So the presence of safe others. Control somático
Mhm.
is the fourth one. The ability to have a body that works in conjunction with your mind, not against it or not involuntarily. And when we think of folks with PTSD or with severe, embodied responses after trauma, one of the biggest things is this challenge they have with control over reactivity, hyperreactivity, maladaptive the book's called maladaptive reactions, what I would call logical adaptations that are not necessarily how you want to behave. Um, so this idea of feeling safe in the body that I have is working in ways that I want it to, in ways that I feel make me feel safe, not unsafe. And then the last is son prácticas culturales y espirituales, this idea of having access to and use of cultural and spiritual resources. And across interviews, these are the five axes of safety that we've identified for folks. And ironically, these are the things that are so frequently fall victim um, to war, to violence, to unrest, and it becomes a lot harder for folks to establish that sense of safety. And it's a long journey to do that.
Now that I listen to you, it comes to my mind something that I have been thinking for a while, that I feel like there's like this lack of empathy and this coldness, this perspective that it hurts me a lot, that is very political and very economical about refugees and migration, not human. It's not a human perspective or point of view, right? And when you said about all these five ways of like creating safety, I think that in general, we're focusing just on like giving shelter and food and feeling that okay, they're already like
Mhm.
not in the war, they have somewhere to sleep and food, but all of these are missing, like feeling part, this conexión a la tierra, this belonging, right? These safe others, this self-regulation, right? To the somatic control, and the cultural practices, that if the society is resistant, the society where I arrive is resistance and has these stereotypes about refugees and immigrants, how can I reconstruct that safetiness, right? And my question here is, how can we create communities? Because the work is only with the refugees, right? But I think also the work is with the community, So it doesn't see it as a problem or as a thing we need to pay, and it opens the perspective as a more compassionate way on seeing refugees and forced displacement. So what do you think about this, about what we can do, socially speaking?
Well, there's a few assumptions baked in to your question, I think. Um, Compassion isn't policy. And, I think there's multiple discussions that we can have. I think there's a huge cultural and political moment that the idea of migration, immigration, folks, you know, being or returning to homelands either through deportation or voluntary. I mean, these are questions Syria. Syria is dealing with this. The context that I'm most familiar with, having many, many folks feel comfortable to go back home by choice. Other countries having more aggressive policies, strongly suggesting that they return or making life really difficult for them through bureaucratic or other means to encourage return. The politics of migration is really not something that I want to get into in this discussion because it's a big topic. Yeah. Increasing compassion doesn't necessarily change policy decisions. I think that there's many people that hold tremendous compassion and a specific type of what they consider pragmatism that is held separately from that, whether it's for electoral policies or different things. It's a complicated issue, and I've seen so many different, conceptualizations of what is humane migration policy, what is healthy migration policy, what is extreme, what is it? These are opinions that we could talk about for a really long time. I think that what we're most focused on here is there are going to be different challenges depending on the origin and the destination. If someone's going from a rural context in Southeast Asia to center city London, the gap between from what is familiar, what's accessible in this place is going to be wider than for example, I was working in southern Syria and northern Jordan. There's a border and a couple of kilometers that separate those things. So culturally, it's much more similar. Linguistically, it's even the same accent of Arabic. So there's certain ways that folks could operate relatively unnoticed if they were a Southern Syrian or a Northern Jordanian in an average city. So there's many of these safety resources that remained intact
Mhm.
across that migration journey, and then others that weren't as intact. Certain countries aren't party to large international treaties on the rights of refugees, for example. Certain countries have policies around hosting temporary displaced people as guests and not labeling them as refugees under international conventions, or having different domestic laws than in international treaties. And that's where a lot of the mess comes through, is that there's so many different a patchwork of policy responses domestically and internationally.
Mhm.
But what we're really talking about is how do we create structures and systems that facilitate
Mhm.
the ability of refugees to feel safe,
Mhm.
right? And I think a lot of the challenges that we're seeing now are around competitions of safety. When the acquisition of safety for refugees somehow is seen as um, reducing the safety for native-born folks. So I can think of many countries that have struggled with this throughout the crisis in Syria. Turkey had so many discussions around the presence of 3 million Syrians is reducing job opportunities and raising housing prices for Turkish citizens in Istanbul. And this was a serious discussion and a problem that happened. So you see this then as a competition, the competition of safety. The ability of one community to establish safely in a place becomes seen as a threat to the safety of another. And that's where a lot of the policy discussions are really focused or around the construction and perception and realities of safety as a zero-sum game.
Mhm.
Uh, and that's where it's like we it might be beneficial to have some of those policy discussions through the lens of safety competitions. But absolutely, I do think that anyone who is working directly with refugees, with migrants, with folks who are established in a place can benefit tremendously
Mhm.
from thinking about what is the value of someone feeling safe? How do I better understand someone? How do I see the best in someone, get the best from someone
Mhm.
when they are able to feel safe?
Mhm.
You know, even in a therapeutic context, when you're working with a client, I have a coaching practice. When I'm working with a client, the quality of dialogue will be so much better when I can create a container that feels safe for that person to be in. And I think that the richer discussions, the richer exchanges that we have, and the more thriving that we see from communities that are displaced comes when they have a greater chance of feeling safe and secure.
Mhm. So what you said is that if we change that focus instead of feeling the competition, but valuing how creating safetiness is going to change how that person, refugee, immigrant, moves in the society and how he or she can bring value to the place that he or she is living is the change that we should follow. I totally
Yeah.
follow that, but how we create that that's the thing, right? How can we
Yeah,
create.
I think
Mhm,
it makes me think of some small examples. You know, when I have traveled, let's say to a conference,
mhm,
and I have a colleague who's from a country whose passport is a lot less powerful than the passport that I have. Those small things, you know, small interactions, my ability to feel confident and safe going through an airport, crossing a border. You know, I realized the more that I worked with folks who hold different passports than me, oh, there's a lot of fundamental groundwork of safety that already exists within me because of certain positions that I hold, ways that being able to speak English, having a credit card, having a bank account, all these sort of basic building blocks of material safety and security, of legal safety and security. It allows me to operate in a way where I can be on a stage and speak in front of tons of people, and but the ability of me to get to that stage is a lot quicker and a lot of a lower bar than folks who have to go through layers of visas and approvals and rejections and appeals. And then do they have the funds to take a taxi to the airport to get to the event? You know, it's really been interesting for me to understand my own ability to show up, to perform, to do my job through this lens of, oh, how safe do I feel engaging in this thing? So it's just been such a transformative shift of filter for me to think, oh, how will this person be different? How will we see the beauty and brightness of them in a way that's different if there are more, if the architecture of safety is made more readily available to them.
mhm,
And of course, it's not always possible. There's a fantasy element to that. I mean, I think a lot about it in war zones. How do you do that in a war zone or in a place that's just suffered 3 years of war?
mhm.
That's really where the hard part is. And again, almost all my work is in the direct periphery of conflict.
Totally. Maybe it's also doing the work in like mm, the places that the refugees arrive, right? Not only in the camps, it's more about like creating the safety nets, like breaking the cycle of victimization in the society, because that way they will always need help, and it's creating more like the dynamic where you can feel safe to be strong again. I don't know if it makes sense. En español,
Yeah,
en español me hace sentido, ¿no? Como lo pienso en mi mente, pero es como
sí, sí, sí.
ayudarlos, es no como cuidarlos y cargarlos, ¿no? Y pobrecito. It's more about like, I will let you in so you reconnect again with your power, with your wholeness, so you can come back and bring all the value to this new society that
Mm.
sustains you, right? I think it that way. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Sí, sí, yo me acuerdo de una historia en Alemania cuando estaba ahí en 2016 haciendo entrevistas con refugiados de Siria que llegaron a Berlín y a Colón y varias ciudades en Alemania. Y un tipo de como 60 años que recién logró un pasaporte alemán después de, no sé, 7 años en el país. Y estaba casi llorando, diciendo que por fin ya no soy refugiado.
Mhm.
El acceso a ese documento que le cambió el estatus legal, porque eso él lo cargaba como un estigma,
Mhm.
porque ser identificar como refugiado llevaba memorias, llevaba reacciones en cualquier edificio gubernamental que entró, que tener papel de refugiado fue tan diferente que tener y presentar papel de ciudadano alemán.
Mm.
How it allowed him to show up differently. It
Mhm.
was really fascinating to watch that it's a the process of finding safety is so linked to the process of exercising dignity.
Totally. I always say that like a residence or a visa is not only a paper, it's not only a document, it's everything that represents all the, as you said, the safetiness that it gives. And also, as you said, the dignity, like feeling that now I could be part, like totally, right? Like without someone
Mm.
doubting on putting on doubt that I can be here, right? Ooh, there are a lot of questions that I have. I'm sure I'm not gonna get into all of them, but what do you understand by healing? When we think about healing, you talk about safetiness and feeling safe, but when we talk about healing, how do you understand it? How, like these years working with people that has experienced the most horrible experiences that we can imagine, we can see a little bit through social media and it breaks our hearts, but what do you understand now about healing? Does it has changed your mind how you see healing now?
Yeah, yeah. This is a question that we ask a lot in our community work in Jordan and elsewhere of what does that word mean to you, right? Sanar.
Hmm.
In Arabic, you would say shifa. Shifa means he means healing. And one of the first questions, and people get sort of wide-eyed, and they would say, "How?"
Mm.
And then you say, "Well, what does that destination even look like?" And you can ask the question really simply: Describe a healed person to me,
Mm.
and you're going to get so many different answers. En Siria, por ejemplo, después de una guerra que duraba 14 años, 13 años, y antes, y even during the process of the war, que el gobierno de Siria que tenían sus cárceles desaparecidos y varios símbolos de autorianismo. What, you know, what does a healed person look like in that society? And we've asked, and you get most people just sort of stare. And I don't know. For some people, it's really small things. It would be the ability to uh, criticize a local government official, the ability to talk about the president without speaking in a whisper in my own home.
Mm.
So some of these were symbolic and small things that were less about the war and more about a system that deeply shaped people's personalities, that shaped their interactions, that shaped how they would behave, even in private spaces.
Mhm.
For others, it was healing means being cared for.
Mhm.
Healing means feeling safe. Healing means going back to what was. And
Mhm.
then there's a sadness because it seems impossible. I don't know, and I don't think that healing means going back to what was within, even within you.
Mhm,
It's a pipe dream. It's impossible
mhm,
for many, many people. One, because context changes. Two, because especially in war, when all of society was exposed to war, everyone changed differently.
mhm,
Not every child was scared of the sound of a plane overhead. Not every adult man self-isolates when he feels distress or depression. Every member of the family had a different response to a collectively experienced phenomenon.
mhm,
So going back to what was, you might be able to go back to something but that you were, but the people that made that situation what it was have also changed.
mhm,
And that's something that people mourn of I'm going back. I mean, I've heard from so many Syrians أنا رجعت بس الكل اتغير. أنا رجعت بس كل الوضع مختلف عن قبل. I've gone back and the whole situation is different. I've gone back and people are different.
mhm,
So, what do you do in a process of return to what was when you realize that what was is unattainable?
mhm, mhm,
And there's a mourning that comes with that of, oh, now I also need to change my expectations for how I will be in the future. And
mhm,
it's like a double gut. It's another punch to the gut
mhm,
because you thought that you were engaged in a process of psychic and cultural return, but that what you thought was the destination is just a mirage.
mhm,
And now changing expectations to thinking, oh, what is it that I want to be given the constraints that we have? Who is it that I want to be given that maybe my sister is no longer with us? My mom has changed. My dad has died. My cousins are in a different country. Reconstructing expectation, reconstructing dreams of who and how and what you want to be requires also taking stock of what has been truly irreparably destroyed and
mhm,
what is even possible in a new environment. So for me, healing, sanar, and shifa is a process of being able to, with more agency and self-directedness, choose how you respond and bear with reality.
mhm.
And also working like hell to make reality more bearable for as many people as possible.
That's beautiful. Yeah, because the idea is to forget what happened, right? And in this case, it's not going to be possible to forget what happened. It's also grieving what is not going to be anymore, right? That it's the life that you used to have. So changing how you respond, being able to feel safe
Mm,
about your own response, right? And as you said, like making the reality more bearable, not just for ourselves, but for like the people around us, is like going back to the dignity, right? And it comes to me
yeah,
dignity, it comes to me resilience, like finding the strength inside us, right?
it's a renegotiation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But to enter any negotiation, to enter any process of negotiation, you want to show up fully. You want to show up knowing your own power, knowing what you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so there's so many stages to this process of healing
Mm-hmm.
in prolonged and protracted traumatic experiences or experiencing trauma and living in continued stressful circumstances, as is the case in many war zones. Um, there's certain things that have to occur within the self for you to even be able to show up to that renegotiation. If my nervous system is dominating my responses to the world, and I have very little ability to exert any top-down control or engage in self-directed regulation. And when I say regulation, I don't mean calming down, because we've done this horrible thing in the field, I think, of substituting self-regulation with meaning calm down. And we tell people to regulate, it means to calm down. In some cases, big emotion is actually desirable because maybe you're working with folks towards being able to feel positive affect again, joy, elation, even things like rabia y ira. These are not necessarily things that we just want to get rid of or shy away from. It's about control, the ability to respond in a way that we can control and feel is appropriate to the circumstance. So that's a huge and critical part is that restoration of agency and control over reactivity and bodily responses, maintaining control, getting control over things like nightmares or, flashbacks. Those the real hard symptom work that matters so much in the process of healing, especially from PTSD or other trauma-related issues. Um, and that is a critical step in this renegotiation of who do I want to be and how am I going to renegotiate safety in this new environment that I inhabit, even if I didn't want the environment to be this way.
Mhm. Yes, totally. There are many factors there, right? Like being able to feel again without feeling like threat by what I'm feeling, right? This long path of like just coming out from the place to survive until I getting to this point, like where I'm able to know what I want, right? And this renegotiation with myself and also with life, but also the support of society. Um, I want to know how you deal with this. This is a question that they make me a lot, like how you deal with all the people talking about their problems, their issues, their challenges,
Mhm.
their trauma. How do you deal with this? Because I don't minimize like every experience. I feel like it's complex that each person in the world has their own pain, right? And each pain it doesn't need to be como calificado, right? It's not
Mm,
all the pains have their own space and are valid, but how do you deal with these kind of things? Because me just watching on social media or reading or knowing about these stories, it makes me cry and it makes me feel like at some point I need to like block my social media sometimes because it's too much to handle. And it's like
mm.
it hurts to know that this reality is happening somewhere in the world and that I'm not able to do anything about it. It really hurts. For me, it's like, I don't know if I'm very sensible, but it's something that it hurts. So, how do you deal when you see this directly, when you get in touch with these people? I know that feeling that you do something, it helps a lot, but how do you, which are your resources, your personal resources?
I actually hold a lot of grace for people because 100 years ago, before social media, there was so many wars and conflicts and instances of violence, of famine, of natural disasters, of horrible events occurring to humans, and we just didn't know about them because we didn't have social media
Mhm.
and the news didn't travel rapidly. And so we're in a really interesting time as a collective, as a species right now, because we have access and insight into disasters, wars, displacements, famines, conflicts happening around the world instantaneously in a way that our ancestors absolutely didn't. So we're experiencing an information flows that allow us to be exposed to so many things. Not that those things weren't necessarily occurring, but that we now know about them more and more frequently.
Mhm.
So there is an emotional overwhelm that makes a lot of sense.
Mhm.
Um, and I might approach it a little bit from a lens of neuroscience just because that's my field of study and practice. And I think about the capacity of the human mind to hold care
Mhm.
for 7 billion people it's too difficult. I mean, there's always groups of people that we simply aren't thinking of at a given time. There's so many different anthropological and neuroscientific studies that show the facility with which we turn off and on compassion, empathy, sympathy, all these different emotions, get turned off and on in ways that are usually adaptive for a person to stay sane and safe. Um, for me, obviously, I've chosen a career and a life where I've been dealing primarily with victims of war.
Mhm.
That includes people that have seen horrible stuff, that have endured horrible stuff. And what I come back to is a couple of key things, que son mi fe, que son mi familia, mis amigos, ejercicio y terapia.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, it's pretty standard answer. Um, small things like con el ejercicio. Um, no matter how hard you jump on the ground or run on the ground or step on the ground, it'll take it.
Mhm.
That's the beautiful thing about the earth,
Mhm.
is its immense capacity to hold us. So I think of it about two directions. Stepping down on the earth, investing it down, and exercise and lifting heavy things and jumping and running and doing what I need to do for that. And then the other direction, because there is no upper limit for what God can hold in terms of our pain, in terms of suffering. And not everyone is a person of faith, and that's okay. And there's many, many spiritual practices and things that folks can do to invest what feels like insurmountable or uncontainable suffering into some force that can hold the entirety of your and everyone else's sorrow and fear and stress. And there's so many faith and spiritual traditions that offer that. Of course, family, friends, family by blood or by choice. Um, and then having a good therapist.
Mhm. That's true. That's true. I share most of them. Like, despite I'm an agnostic, but
Mhm,
my
sure.
spiritual perspective has helped me to manage with this. Yes, that you cannot keep turn on to the empathy and to the compassion because it's so painful, right? At some point, as you said, it needs to be adaptive. Sí, adaptativo, ¿no? O sea, como in a way that you can keep doing your life, but without forgetting, right?
Mm.
To do your thing. So I always say, I want to live in a way that each person that I step in my life, directly or indirectly, feels safe with me and feels respected. Like it doesn't matter if it's a lady that I don't know
Mm, mm,
was in a gross drugstore and in the cashier, or it doesn't matter if it's someone crossing the street and me stopping in the car. It doesn't matter. I want to create that environment around me, right? Is the way that I'm trying to give that, como esta conciencia de cómo vivimos, right? This consciousness of how we are in this world. As you said, there could be minimum things that can change how we react to each other and how we change, maybe not the war, but just el ambiente, ¿no? De empezar a sentirnos más conectados, to
mm.
start feeling we don't need to be against each other.
Y esos dolores que cargamos, esas heridas que cargamos, para mí esos son regalos, esos son dones. Y cómo administramos esos regalos que el mundo nos ha dado, esa es la cuestión. Como para mí, si yo si las experiencias de mi mamá resultó en que causó en parte mi ansiedad, si quiero esa ansiedad o no la quiero, igual la tengo.
Mhm.
Es un regalo del universo y mi misión es administrarlo
Mhm.
para el bien de otros.
Mhm. Totally. I share that with you. I think that my personal challenges have led me to this professional path of helping others to heal.
Y tampoco es romantizar, ¿no? Tener una perspectiva romántica que, ay, que nuestros dolores son regalos y bendiciones. No, pero igual, they exist and they're there.
It's how we use them, right? It's how we use them.
And whether or not you want them to, whether they're good or they're bad, or they should or shouldn't be there, or they're the product of injustice, or whatever they come from, they are there.
Mhm.
And we do make choices about what we do with them.
Mhm. Mhm. Hi, Mike. It has been a pleasure to hear you. Riquísimo. La próxima vez en español, si bien me sentí a
Así,
gusto Pero yo siento que mis preguntas son más atinadas en español.
No, pero como te dije, es la terminología de
I
neurociencia, la
totally
terminología
understand.
psicológica que me da cosa porque eso es en mi trabajo es inglés y árabe.
Totally.
Y platicar sobre el qué hice hoy, qué voy a comer, como que hablaba con mis abuelos y con mis parientes, eso es otra cosa, pero hablar de neurociencia en español siempre me da cosa y me confundo en la terminología.
I feel the same. I today I was able to that because I wanted people to listen to you, to your experience, to your research. So thank you so much. Before finishing this video, I want you to share a message that you consider to end this conversation, and also that you're able to share your current projects, the organizations that you are part of. I'm gonna let all the information that you let me in the description of the video, but
Okay.
I would like you to share people how they can follow your work, and if you have trainings for professionals, talks, any initiative that you want to share.
Thank you. For me, the biggest thing I like to encourage folks to think about is cartografía de seguridad. How do you understand and start to map out what is it that you have in your life, even when a lot maybe has been taken from you? What is it that you have in your life that makes you feel safer?
Mhm,
Not safe, safer.
mhm,
And how do you invest in those? How do you reframe those? How do you engage with those to strengthen their ability to be critical in times of stress and trauma?
mhm. Cerramos con ese mensaje y ¿en dónde te encuentran, Mike? Platícanos un poquito.
Ay, yo tengo miedo de redes sociales, entonces es un poco difícil. Pero igual, I'll send you some links that you'll find below where folks can
It
follow
was
some of the
difficult
work.
to get to you. It was difficult. I did
Yeah.
research. I was like, I haven't stuck, well, like this.
Bueno, lo voy a hacer un poco más fácil para los que están
I
aquí con
stalked you
nosotros en
in
esta
Oxford. I was
entrevista.
like reaching you to give you my book, and now on the virtual world, it needs to stop, Mike. Ya no te voy a, ya no puedo estar así.
All right.
Te mandaré el libro
Thank you.
hasta
We'll share some. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. I would love that. Thank you.
me encantaría que lo tengas.
Bueno, muchísimas gracias.
I hope this is not the last time. You give me
Claro que
the
no.
links so people can follow you and see your programs and talks. And thank you so much for what you're doing. And thank you for today. Take
Ha
care.
sido un honor y un gusto. Muchísimas gracias.
Cuídate mucho. Un abrazo.
Bueno, igual. Chao.